I woke up before the sun came up, even though my alarm hadn't gone off yet. My eyes opened to the same cracked ceiling I'd stared at for years, but that morning it looked different. It looked temporary. My interview was only a few hours away. I lay there for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of our house. The television was already on downstairs. My father always left it playing loud enough for everyone to hear, whether anyone watched it or not. Cabinet doors slammed in the kitchen. My mother's footsteps moved back and forth across the old linoleum floor. Every sound reminded me that I still lived under their roof, for now. I sat up carefully and looked at the garment bag hanging from the closet door. Inside was the only blazer I'd ever owned. I'd bought it 3 months earlier after picking up extra shifts at the grocery store. While my coworkers spent their paychecks on new phones and weekend trips, I skipped lunch more days than I wanted to admit. I carried peanut butter sandwiches from home. I walked instead of taking the bus, whenever the weather allowed. Every dollar I saved brought me closer to buying something I believed could change my life. That navy blue blazer wasn't just clothing. It was proof that I believed I deserved a future. I smiled without realizing it as I reached for the garment bag. Today's the day, I whispered to myself. For just a second, I imagined walking into that downtown office, shaking hands with the hiring manager, and finally being seen for who I really was instead of who my family insisted I would always be. The thought made my chest feel lighter. I unzipped the bag. My smile disappeared. I froze. For several seconds, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. A thick streak of white bleach ran from the shoulder all the way down the front of the blazer. The fabric had puckered and faded into ugly orange patches. One sleeve had several clean cuts through it, like someone had taken scissors and carefully sliced the material without cutting it completely off.
No.
The word barely came out. My hands started shaking as I lifted the jacket closer to my face. The smell hit me next.
Bleach.
Fresh bleach. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I searched for another explanation. Maybe something had spilled. Maybe a cleaning bottle had leaked. But nothing else in the closet was damaged. Only the blazer. Only the one thing I needed that morning. I swallowed hard and hurried downstairs, still clutching it in my hands. My mother stood at the sink washing dishes that weren't dirty. She glanced at me for less than a second. "What?" she asked flatly. I held up the blazer. "My jacket. Look at it." She barely turned around.
So?
My voice cracked. "It was fine last night." She shrugged and reached for another plate. "Guess accidents happen." It didn't happen by itself. She dried her hands slowly, then faced me with an expression so calm it almost made me question myself. "You care more about that jacket than your own family."
Ich zerrte her.
What does that even mean? It means you've been acting like you're too good for this house ever since you got that interview. Before I could answer, my father walked into the kitchen carrying his coffee mug. He looked at the blazer, then at me. "You're still thinking about that job? It's an interview."
He laughed.
"For people like you?" I felt my stomach twist. "I earned that interview." "You earned responsibilities here," he said. "Not some fancy office where they'll replace you in a week." I tightened my grip on the ruined blazer until my knuckles turned white. My mother folded her arms. "You should cancel it and stay home. Your sister needs someone to watch her kids this afternoon anyway." That's when I looked from my father's face to my mother's, and something inside me went cold. Neither of them looked surprised by the damage. They looked satisfied. I stood in the kitchen clutching my ruined blazer, but I barely saw the bleach stains anymore. My parents' expressions dragged me somewhere I'd spent my whole life trying to escape. It wasn't just about that morning. It never had been. Growing up, I learned early that our house had different rules depending on which child they applied to. My older brother, Marcus, could do no wrong. If he brought home a report card full of C's, my father clapped him on the shoulder. "School ain't everything," he'd say with a grin. My boys got street smarts. When I came home with straight A's, I laid the report card on the kitchen table, my heart pounding with excitement. My mother barely looked up from her phone.
Good, she said.
"Now go start dinner." That was it.
No hug, no smile, no celebration.
Just another chore. I convinced myself they were tired. I told myself they showed love differently. Children became experts at making excuses for the people who hurt them. Every birthday reminded me where I stood. Marcus got parties with cousins filling the backyard, balloons tied to the fence, and homemade cakes covered with his favorite frosting. On my 16th birthday, I came home from school carrying a cupcake my best friend had bought me. Nobody in my house remembered what day it was. My father asked why I was smiling. When I quietly said, "It's my birthday," he frowned like I'd interrupted something important.
Oh.
That single word stayed with me longer than any present ever could. The next day, life went back to normal. Eventually, I stopped expecting anyone to remember. College became my escape plan. I applied for scholarships late at night after everyone else had gone to bed. I wrote essays at the kitchen table while laundry spun in the background. Every acceptance email felt like another brick laid in the road leading away from that house. When I received my biggest scholarship, I ran into the living room holding the letter. "I got it." My mother glanced at the paper. "That's nice." Marcus looked up from the couch.
"Can you keep it down?"
"I'm watching the game." The letter slowly lowered in my hands. No one even asked how much I'd earned. That night, I folded it carefully and slid it under my mattress because it was the only place anything important to me felt safe. Working part-time during college wasn't optional. I stocked shelves at a grocery store until midnight, then studied before sleeping for a few hours. Every Friday, my paycheck landed in my account. Every Saturday, my mother somehow needed money. "We're short on the electric bill. Your sister needs diapers. The refrigerator's acting up." Family came first. At least, that's what they always told me. The first few times, I handed over the money without hesitation. The 10th time I asked, "How much do we still owe?" My father's eyes narrowed. "You keeping score now?"
No.
"I just wondered. You sound selfish." That word hit harder than shouting ever could. Selfish. After everything I gave. So I apologized. I actually apologized for asking where my own money was going. From then on, I stopped asking questions. I worked extra shifts instead. Whenever Marcus needed money, it was called help. Whenever I needed money, it became a lecture about sacrifice. By the time I graduated, I had learned to celebrate every accomplishment alone. Every certificate stayed in a folder under my bed. Every compliment from professors remained trapped inside my head because bringing them home only guaranteed another reminder to stay humble. The interview I had earned wasn't just another job opportunity. It was the first door that had ever opened because of my own hard work instead of someone else's permission. That blazer wasn't expensive. It wasn't designer. It wasn't perfect. But every stitch represented a meal I'd skipped, an overtime shift I'd accepted, and a dream I'd refused to let die. Looking back at my parents standing there without a trace of surprise, I finally understood why neither of them had asked who ruined it. They already knew. I stood in that kitchen staring at my parents for what felt like forever. Neither of them looked away. Neither of them apologized. My mother simply picked up the dish towel again, and my father took another sip of his coffee as if the conversation had already ended. Something inside me wanted to scream. Instead, I turned around and walked back upstairs. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I closed my bedroom door, I leaned against it and finally let myself breathe. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the blazer onto the floor. I laid it carefully across my bed. The bleach stains glared back at me like they were daring me to quit. I thought about calling the company and making an excuse. I could say I was sick. I could ask to reschedule. But another voice inside me whispered something I hadn't heard before. That's exactly what they want. I walked into the bathroom, grabbed a damp cloth, and started gently blotting the fabric even though I knew bleach damage couldn't be undone. The stains stayed exactly where they were. I found a small sewing kit in my dresser and stitched the cuts in the sleeve together with slow, uneven movements. My sewing looked terrible, but at least the sleeve wouldn't hang open anymore. When I finished, I held the blazer up. It wasn't professional anymore. It wasn't impressive, but it was wearable. Barely. I slipped it on anyway. Looking in the mirror hurt. The repaired sleeve pulled awkwardly. The faded streak across my chest was impossible to ignore. I swallowed hard. This doesn't define you, I whispered to my reflection. For the first time in my life, I chose to believe my own voice instead of theirs. The bus ride downtown felt longer than ever. Every time someone looked in my direction, I wondered if they noticed the damaged blazer. A woman sitting across from me smiled politely. I immediately looked away, convinced she felt sorry for me. By the time I stepped into the company's lobby, my palms were soaked with sweat. The building looked nothing like my neighborhood. The floors gleamed. People walked confidently through the halls carrying laptops and coffee cups, greeting each other with relaxed smiles. Nobody seemed rushed. Nobody seemed angry. The receptionist welcomed me warmly. "Good morning. You must be here for the management trainee interview." "Yes, ma'am. You can have a seat. They'll be with you shortly." She smiled. Just smiled. Without judging my clothes. Without asking why I looked nervous. Without making me feel like I didn't belong. It caught me off guard. A few minutes later, another employee led me into a bright conference room where 3 interviewers waited. I shook each of their hands. My voice trembled during the introductions, but I answered every question as honestly as I could. They asked about college. They asked about leadership. They asked how I handled pressure. Each answer became easier than the last. Then the woman sitting in the middle glanced toward my blazer. Her expression softened. "I hope you don't mind me asking," she said gently, "but did something happen to your jacket?" The room fell quiet. For one terrifying second, I considered lying. I could invent a story about spilling bleach while cleaning. I could laugh it off. Instead, I looked down at the stitched sleeve before meeting her eyes again. "I worked for months to buy this blazer because I couldn't afford another one," I said quietly. "It was damaged this morning before I left." She waited. I noticed she wasn't looking at me with pity. She was simply listening. I almost stayed home, I admitted, but I realized I'd regret missing this opportunity more than I'd regret walking and wearing a damaged jacket. No one interrupted me, so I repaired what I could and showed up. The man beside her slowly nodded. "You still came." "Yes, sir."
Why?
I took a slow breath. Because I couldn't control what happened to my blazer. I looked each of them in the eye, but I could control whether I gave up. 3 days after the interview, I kept checking my phone every few minutes, pretending I wasn't. Every buzz made my heart race. Every spam email made my stomach drop. By Wednesday afternoon, I had convinced myself they had chosen someone else. I stood behind register 4 at the grocery store, scanning canned vegetables while trying not to think about the interview. Paper or plastic? I asked automatically. The customer answered, but I barely heard him. My phone vibrated inside my apron pocket. I ignored it. Company policy. A few seconds later, it vibrated again. Then again. My manager noticed me glancing down. "You can check it," she said quietly. "You've looked like you're about to pass out all day." I gave her an embarrassed smile and stepped into the break room. The screen showed an unfamiliar downtown number. My hands started shaking before I even answered. "Hello? May I speak with?" The woman asked, saying my name. This is me." "Wonderful. This is Angela Brooks from Harrison Financial." I stopped breathing. "We enjoyed meeting you earlier this week." I closed my eyes. "And we'd like to officially offer you the position." The room disappeared around me. I leaned against the vending machine because my knees suddenly felt weak. You would?" She laughed softly. "We absolutely would." I pressed my free hand over my mouth. She explained the starting salary. I thought I'd heard her wrong. She repeated the number. It was almost double what I'd secretly hoped for. Then she mentioned health insurance, retirement benefits, paid training, relocation assistance, and a professional mentor assigned during my first year. Each sentence sounded more unbelievable than the last. When she asked if I accepted the offer, tears rolled down my face before I could answer. "Yes," I whispered. Then louder.
Yes.
"Absolutely." After we hung up, I stood alone in that tiny break room, crying and laughing at the same time. Nobody had handed me this opportunity. Nobody had pulled strings. Nobody had saved me. I'd earned it. For the first time in my life, I felt proud without waiting for someone else's permission. That feeling stayed with me all the way home. I should have known it wouldn't last long. I got the job, I announced as soon as I walked through the front door. My mother looked up from the couch. My father muted the television. "How much?" I blinked.
What?
"The salary," he said. "How much are they paying?" "Not congratulations. Not we're proud of you. Just a number." I hesitated before answering. When I told them, both of their eyes widened. Marcus let out a low whistle.
Zang.
My mother sat forward. "Well, that's going to help around here." I frowned. "What do you mean?" My father leaned back in his chair like everything had already been decided. "You'll keep living here." I actually planned on taking the relocation package. His expression changed instantly.
No.
The single word landed like a hammer. "The company's helping me move closer to the office." "You don't need to move," my mother snapped. "This family needs you. I've worked for this." "And we raised you," my father replied. "You think all that was free?" I stared at him. "I've been paying bills since I was 18. Not enough." My mother reached for a notepad on the coffee table. "We've already started figuring out a budget." She slid the paper toward me. Nearly 3/4 of my future paycheck had already been assigned to household expenses, Marcus's car payment, my sister's childcare costs, and my parents' credit card bills. There wasn't enough left for rent, or groceries, or my own future. I looked up slowly. "This can't be serious." "It is," my father said. "Family takes care of family." Something felt different this time. Not just the demand, the confidence. They weren't asking. They were counting on money they believed already belonged to them. That night, I went upstairs to gather the paperwork I'd need for my relocation package. I pulled an old file box from beneath my bed, expecting to find my scholarship letters, tax documents, and savings records. Instead, several folders were gone. The empty spaces stared back at me. I searched the closet, my desk drawers, every shelf. Nothing. Then I remembered with absolute certainty where I'd placed a thick envelope containing scholarship paperwork and bank records. It had been there just a week earlier. Now it had vanished. I sat on the floor of my bedroom long after midnight, surrounded by empty folders and scattered papers. The house had gone quiet hours earlier, but sleep never came. I couldn't stop staring at the gaps inside that file box. Some documents were still there. My birth certificate, old report cards, a few pay stubs from the grocery store. But everything connected to my scholarships, college finances, and savings had disappeared. It didn't make sense. I wasn't an organized person by nature, which was exactly why I remembered putting all those papers in one large manila envelope. I had labeled it with a black marker the day I started college. Financial records. Simple. Impossible to forget. Yet the envelope was gone. The next morning, I waited until my parents left the house before searching everywhere. I looked under beds, inside hallway closets, even in the garage where old boxes collected dust. Nothing. When they returned home, I tried to sound calm. Has anyone seen my college paperwork? My mother, she disappeared into a back office. When she returned, she carried a thin file. She placed it in front of me. Everything appears to be here. I flipped through the paperwork. Acceptance letters, grant notices, award summaries. Then I noticed something. There should be more. She looked confused. What do you mean? I received multiple scholarships during my junior and senior years. She nodded.
You did.
But these only show the awards.
Correct.
What about the refunds? She blinked. The refund checks? My heart skipped. What refund checks? She turned the file toward herself and pointed to several entries. After your tuition and fees were paid each semester, there were remaining balances. Refunds were issued. I stared at the page. I never got any checks. They weren't paper checks. She clicked through another screen. They were direct deposited. I felt cold. Into what account?
I'm sorry, she said gently.
For privacy reasons, I can't display the full account number. Can you at least tell me if it belonged to me? She hesitated. The account was listed under the parent or guardian information submitted with your enrollment documents. The room suddenly felt too small. My parents handled my paperwork when I started school, I whispered. She gave me a sympathetic look. If you believe there's an error, our records department can provide transaction histories. I nodded, but I barely heard anything else she said. Outside, I sat on a bench staring at the copies in my hands. Thousands of dollars. Semester after semester. Money I never knew existed. Money I'd borrowed through extra work shifts because I thought I had nothing left. I remembered working double shifts to buy textbooks, skipping meals, walking miles to save bus fare, all while scholarship refunds had apparently been deposited somewhere else. My phone buzzed. It was Professor Daniels, one of the professors who had written my recommendation letter for the interview. When he heard the tremble in my voice, he asked me to meet him in his office. An hour later, I spread the documents across his desk. He read them carefully, without interrupting. Finally, he looked up. This doesn't add up. I know. Have you checked your bank statements from those years? I don't even know where to start. He leaned back in his chair. Then we'll start at the beginning. For the first time since finding the empty folder, someone said we instead of you. By the end of that afternoon, we had created a timeline on a yellow legal pad. Scholarship awards, expected refunds, part-time income. Every date led to another unanswered question. And one line near the middle of the page made my stomach turn. The refund deposits had continued for nearly 4 years, long after my parents had insisted there was never any money left for me. I didn't confront my parents that same night. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to march through the front door, throw the copies of those financial records onto the kitchen table, and demand an explanation. Instead, I sat in my car outside the house with the engine off. Professor Daniel's words kept replaying in my head. Facts first, emotion second. He had reminded me that anger made people careless, especially when the truth was finally within reach. So I waited. Over the next few days, I collected every record the college could legally provide. I printed old bank statements from my own account and compared dates. The numbers never matched the story I'd been told growing up. Whenever I had struggled to pay for books, refund money had already been deposited elsewhere. Whenever my parents claimed there wasn't enough money to help me, someone else had already helped. I just never knew it. By the end of the week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Saturday afternoon, our family gathered at my grandmother's house for my cousin's engagement dinner. The house smelled like baked macaroni, fried chicken, and sweet potatoes. Kids ran through the hallway laughing while gospel music played softly in the background. Normally, family gatherings exhausted me. That day, I barely noticed anyone. The folder in my hands felt heavier than it should have. My mother noticed it first. "What are you carrying around?" "Paperwork." She narrowed her eyes. "What paperwork?" "The kind we need to talk about." My father's smile disappeared before I even opened the folder. "We're not doing this today." "I think we are." Several conversations around the room slowly faded. Everyone looked toward us. I laid the documents on the dining room table. I went back to the college. Silence. I requested copies of my financial records. My father's jaw tightened.
So?
So they showed me scholarship refunds. Nobody spoke. I continued. Thousands of dollars. My mother crossed her arms. That money went toward this family. I blinked. She hadn't denied it. "You took it?" "We used it." My father stepped beside her. "We fed you. We kept a roof over your head. We sacrificed." His voice grew louder with every sentence. "You think raising children is free?" I stared at both of them. "That wasn't your money. It became our money the day you lived under our roof." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Marcus leaned against the wall without saying a word. I looked around the room. "Did any of you know about this?" Nobody answered. Finally, my mother pointed directly at me. "Look at you." "What about me?" "You got one good job offer, and suddenly you think you're better than everybody." "I'm asking where my scholarship money went." "You're accusing your own parents." "I'm asking for the truth." "You owe us everything." Those words landed harder than I expected. Everything. As if my entire life had been a debt instead of a relationship. Before I could respond, I heard a soft voice from the corner of the room. I knew something wasn't right. Everyone turned. My Aunt Lorraine slowly stood from her chair. She was the oldest of my grandmother's sisters, the kind of woman who rarely interrupted anyone. She walked toward the table, her hands folded carefully in front of her. "I've wondered about this for years." My mother immediately shook her head. "Lorraine, stay out of this."
No.
Her voice remained calm. "I won't." She looked at me with sadness in her eyes. "When you graduated high school, I mailed you $500. I frowned. "I never got it." "I know." The room became perfectly still. "I called your mother 2 weeks later because you never thanked me. She told me you'd received it and were too busy getting ready for college." I slowly turned toward my parents. My aunt continued. "Then your Uncle Raymond sent money." She looked across the room. He thought it helped buy your first laptop. Uncle Raymond's eyebrows shot up. It didn't? I couldn't even answer. My aunt took another slow breath. And every semester, when I asked how your scholarships were helping, she looked directly at my mother. You always answered for them. No one in the room spoke. The silence felt louder than every argument we'd ever had. Then my cousin quietly asked the question that changed everything. So, how many people sent money that never reached them? I left my grandmother's house before anyone asked me to stay. No one tried to stop me. Behind me, I heard voices rise and overlap, but I didn't turn around. I had spent my entire life looking back, hoping someone would finally choose me. That night, I chose myself. The next morning, I accepted the relocation package without hesitation. The apartment the company helped me find wasn't fancy. It was a one-bedroom unit on the third floor of a quiet brick building across town. The walls were painted a plain off-white. The kitchen was small enough that I could touch both counters by stretching out my arms, and the windows overlooked a parking lot instead of a skyline. It was beautiful, not because of what it looked like, because every key on the ring belonged to me. When I unlocked the front door for the first time, the apartment echoed with emptiness. I smiled anyway. There you are, I whispered. No one answered. For the first time in my life, silence felt welcoming instead of frightening. I owned one couch bought from a thrift store, a mattress on the floor, 2 folding chairs, and a coffee maker one of my coworkers insisted I take because she had upgraded hers. It still works perfectly, she told me. I thanked her like she'd handed me gold. Little by little, the apartment started feeling like home. Not because I filled it with furniture, because I filled it with peace. My first morning there, I woke up automatically before sunrise, expecting to hear my father yelling for someone to take out the trash, or my mother calling my name from downstairs. Nothing. Just birds outside the window. I lay there listening. The quiet almost made me cry. At work, things felt just as unfamiliar. People asked how my weekend had been because they genuinely wanted to know. When I finished a project early, my supervisor smiled. Nice work. I actually looked behind me. She laughed. I'm talking to you. 3 simple words. Nice work. No criticism attached. No reminder that someone else had done better. No warning not to become arrogant. Just appreciation. Every compliment felt like learning a language I should have known years ago. One afternoon, my coworker Jasmine noticed me eating lunch alone. She carried her tray over without asking. You always sit by yourself? I guess. You don't have to. That was it. No pressure.
No pity.
She simply sat down and started talking about her dog refusing to eat vegetables. I laughed harder than the story deserved. Not because it was hilarious. Because nobody expected anything from me except to be present. A few weeks later, I started therapy through the company's health insurance. Walking into that office terrified me more than the job interview had. I expected judgment. Instead, the therapist asked one question. What brings you here? The answer caught in my throat. I don't know how to live without feeling guilty. Saying those words out loud made them real. Every session peeled away another layer of beliefs I'd carried since childhood. That love had to be earned. That saying no made me selfish. That surviving and living were the same thing. They weren't. Payday became my favorite day of the month. Not because of the amount, because the direct deposit notification appeared on my phone, and every dollar stayed exactly where I intended it to stay. My account, my future, my decisions.
No explanations. No permission.
One Saturday afternoon, while unpacking the last moving box, I found the garment bag. I unzipped it slowly. The navy blazer still carried faint bleach stains across the shoulder. The stitches in the sleeve remained crooked, a reminder of my trembling hands that morning. I slipped it onto a hanger instead of throwing it away. Some scars didn't deserve to be hidden. They deserved to be remembered. I hung it inside the closet where I would see it every morning before work. Not as a reminder of what my parents had tried to destroy, as proof that they hadn't succeeded. Then my phone lit up with an incoming call. It wasn't my parents. It was my Aunt Lorraine. When I answered, the first thing she said made my heart stop. "I found something," she whispered, "and I don't think your parents ever wanted you to see it." Months passed more quietly than I ever imagined they could. Life stopped feeling like something I had to survive. It became something I could actually build. Every morning, I walked past the navy blazer hanging in my closet before getting dressed for work. The bleach stains were still there. The uneven stitches still crossed one sleeve. I never replaced it. I didn't need to. It reminded me that the hardest day of my life had also been the day I finally stopped letting other people decide my future. Work became the place where I discovered who I was without constant criticism echoing in my ears. My mentor, Mr. Reynolds, challenged me in ways that felt unfamiliar. Not because he wanted me to fail, because he expected me to succeed. One afternoon, he dropped a thick folder on my desk. "I'd like you to lead this project." I looked around the office. "You mean, by myself?" He smiled.
No. He pointed at me.
"I mean because you're ready." Those words stayed with me for days. Nobody had ever said I was ready for anything. I buried myself in the assignment. Long evenings became normal again, but they felt different from the nights I'd spent stocking grocery shelves. Every hour I invested now carried me toward my own future instead of simply helping me survive another week. When the project ended, senior management invited me into a conference room. I expected criticism. Instead, they applauded. My supervisor slid a letter across the table. Inside was my first promotion. Along with it came another salary increase. I thanked them, but once I reached my car, I sat behind the steering wheel with tears running down my face. Not because of the money, because someone had finally noticed my work without asking what I could give them in return. The first thing I did after that promotion wasn't buying a nicer car or moving into a larger apartment. I paid off every remaining student loan balance. Watching those numbers disappear from my account felt like removing invisible chains I'd carried for years. Then I started saving. Every month, a portion of my paycheck went into investments. Another portion went into an emergency fund. For the first time, my future no longer depended on luck. It depended on choices. Several months later, Professor Daniels invited me back to campus as a guest speaker for graduating seniors. Standing behind that podium, I recognized the same nervous expressions I'd worn not long before. I told them about resilience, about showing up even when life tried to convince them they didn't belong. I never mentioned my parents. I didn't need to. After the event ended, the college's scholarship director approached me. "We're expanding our hardship assistance fund." She smiled warmly. "Would you ever consider becoming a donor someday?" I thought about the student I used to be, working double shifts, skipping meals, wondering whether anyone believed in me. I'd like to start now. It wasn't a large amount, but it came from me. It reached the students it was intended for. That mattered more than the number on the check. Meanwhile, word traveled through the family faster than I expected. Aunt Lorraine called often, not to gossip, just to ask how I was doing. Sometimes Uncle Raymond joined those conversations. Then cousins I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. None of them asked me for money. They apologized instead. We believed what we were told. I should have checked on you. I didn't know. I accepted their apologies without pretending the past had never happened. Trust returned slowly, exactly the way it should. The strangest part was hearing about my parents through other people instead of living inside their chaos. Without my paycheck covering bills, they struggled.
Marcus still depended on them.
The relatives who had once quietly sent money stopped doing so after learning where it had actually gone. Nobody punished my parents. Nobody needed to. The truth had simply changed how everyone saw them. And for the first time in my life, I realized something that felt almost impossible. Winning had nothing to do with watching them lose. It had everything to do with finally becoming someone they could no longer control. Then one Monday morning, my assistant walked into my office carrying a sealed envelope. It was hand-delivered, she said. There wasn't a return address. I turned the envelope over. The handwriting on the front stopped my heart. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to my mother. I stared at the envelope for nearly 10 minutes before opening it. The handwriting on the front carried me back to permission slips, birthday cards signed without much thought, and grocery lists taped to our refrigerator. For a moment, my hands felt 20 years younger. Inside was a single sheet of paper.
Can we talk?
There was no explanation.
No apology.
Just a date, a time, and the address of a small diner halfway between my apartment and my parents' neighborhood. I almost threw it away. Instead, I folded it carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Curiosity wasn't the same as forgiveness. A week later, I walked into the diner 5 minutes early. My parents were already there. They looked older than I remembered. My father's shoulders had rounded. The confidence that used to fill every room seemed to have settled into silence instead. My mother smiled when she saw me, but it disappeared before I reached the table. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I nodded. "I only have an hour." The waitress poured coffee and left. Nobody touched it. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We've all said things we regret." I waited. He looked at me as if expecting that sentence to be enough. When I didn't answer, my mother leaned forward. "The family hasn't been the same." I looked out the window for a second before meeting her eyes again. "I know. We miss you. I believe you." The words surprised both of us. They were true. People could miss someone and still have hurt them deeply. My father rubbed the edge of his coffee cup. We figured, maybe it's time to move on. Move on from what? He hesitated.
The past.
I let the silence settle between us. The past has a name. Neither of them spoke. I continued quietly. My scholarships. My savings. The lies. My mother's eyes dropped to the table. We did what we thought we had to do.
No.
I shook my head gently.
You did what you chose to do. She sighed.
We kept this family together. By taking from me. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. For the first time in my life, I noticed I wasn't trembling. I wasn't afraid of disappointing them anymore. The guilt that used to rush in whenever I defended myself simply wasn't there. My father looked exhausted. "We can't change what happened."
No.
I nodded. "You can't." The waitress returned, asked if anyone wanted dessert, and quietly walked away after all three of us declined. My mother reached across the table, but stopped before touching my hand. "We just want things to go back to normal." I smiled sadly. There was never anything normal about how we lived. Those words hung in the air longer than anything else we'd said. I stood. I brought something. I walked to my car and returned carrying the familiar garment bag. My parents looked confused as I unzipped it. I lifted out the navy blazer. The bleach stains had faded slightly over time, but they were still visible. The crooked stitches still crossed one sleeve. My mother covered her mouth.
I kept it, I said.
I don't understand, my father whispered. I used to think this jacket represented the worst day of my life. I held it carefully between my hands. But I was wrong. I ran my fingers across the repaired sleeve. You tried to destroy the one thing that made me believe I had a future. Neither of them looked at me. Instead, you forced me to discover that my future never depended on a jacket. I smiled, not at them, but at the person I had become. It depended on whether I was willing to keep walking. I carefully placed the blazer back inside the garment bag. I forgive you. Both of them looked up at once. But forgiveness isn't permission. Their expressions fell. I'm not coming back. You'll always be my parents. But I'll never again be the version of me who believed love had to be earned. I picked up the garment bag and turned toward the door. Behind me, my mother quietly called my name one last time. I paused, but I didn't turn around. Years passed more quietly than I ever imagined they would. The kind of quiet I used to fear became the kind I protected. Every morning started the same way. I brewed coffee, opened the curtains in my home, and stood for a moment watching the sunrise paint the city in soft shades of gold. There were no slammed doors, no shouting from another room. No footsteps that made my shoulders tense before I even knew who was coming. Peace had become ordinary. That was something I never stopped appreciating. My career continued growing in ways I once thought only happened to other people. Promotions came because I earned them, not because I begged for approval. New employees often joined my department fresh out of college, nervous in the same way I had been years before. Whenever one of them doubted themselves, I recognized the look immediately. One afternoon, a young analyst named Brianna stood outside my office holding a folder so tightly her knuckles had turned white. I don't think I'm ready for this presentation, she admitted. I smiled because I'd said almost those exact words to my mentor years earlier.
Come in.
For the next hour, we practiced every slide together. She stumbled through the first attempt. She laughed at herself during the second. By the third, she spoke with confidence. Before leaving, she paused at the door. Why do you always make time for people? I looked toward the window for a moment. Because someone once made time for me. She nodded, even though she didn't know the whole story. She didn't need to. The scholarship fund I started with a single modest donation slowly grew beyond anything I expected. Friends contributed. Coworkers contributed. Former students who had once received help eventually came back to support the next generation. Watching that happen healed something inside me that I hadn't known was still broken. Money that had once been taken from my future was now helping build someone else's. That felt like justice. Not revenge. Just purpose. From time to time, I heard small updates about my parents through relatives. They still lived in the same house. Marcus eventually found steady work and began taking more responsibility for his own life. My parents and I exchange holiday cards every year. Nothing more, nothing less. The distance between us remained. So did the respect for those boundaries. Surprisingly, that became enough. One Sunday afternoon, Aunt Lorraine visited my home for lunch. As always, she wandered through the house admiring every little improvement I had made. When she reached the hallway closet, she noticed the familiar garment bag hanging exactly where it always had. You still have it? I smiled. I always will. She laughed softly. I figured. After she left, I opened the closet. The navy blazer still hung neatly on its wooden hanger. The bleach stains had faded with time, but never disappeared completely. The crooked stitches remained exactly where my frightened hands had sewn them together on the morning I believed my future had been destroyed. I reached out and brushed my fingers across the sleeve. Years earlier, I had looked at that blazer and seen humiliation, then survival. Now I saw something entirely different, a beginning. If my parents hadn't tried to stop me, I might never have discovered how strong I actually was. If they hadn't hidden the truth, I might never have learned the value of honesty. If they hadn't tried to convince me I was worth less than everyone else, I might never have understood that self-worth could never come from someone else's approval. Some people inherited money. Some inherited family businesses. Some inherited homes. I inherited wounds. But wounds weren't the end of a story. Sometimes they became the place where wisdom grew. I gently zipped the garment bag closed and returned it to its place. Not because I needed a reminder of the pain, because I wanted to remember the promise I made to myself that morning. No matter who tried to define my future, I would always keep walking. And this time, I knew exactly where I belonged.